It was just another quiet morning at Miller's Diner, the kind of place where the regulars always knew which booth they wanted, and the coffee never stopped flowing. In the far corner, by the window that caught the early sun, sat an old woman. Her hair was snow-white, neatly tied back. She wore a faded cardigan, slacks a size too big, and thick glasses that made her eyes look softer than they were. She came in every morning at 7:15, sat in the same spot, and ordered nothing more than a black coffee and a dry piece of toast. She rarely spoke, only nodded politely if someone greeted her. Most folks just called her ma'am or didn't address her at all. To most, she was invisible. That changed the day the three of them walked in, young, loud, and clearly new in town. The kind of guys who thought the world owed them something. They swaggered in like they owned the place, laughing at something on one of their phones, and sat at the booth next to hers without a second glance at anyone else. But when one of them noticed the old woman sitting alone, he grinned. "Hey, check it out," he said, not bothering to whisper. "Creepy grandma's here again. What's she doing? Counting ghosts or something?" The others snickered. One of them leaned over, pretending to squint. "Think she even knows where she is?" "Looks like she hasn't said a word in 20 years, the third added. "Probably just sits there judging everyone." Their laughter wasn't cruel so much as careless, the kind that comes from people too young to know better and too arrogant to care. But it cut through the room anyway. Conversations died. Forks paused halfway to mouths. And the old woman? She didn't flinch. She simply lifted her cup of coffee to her lips, took a sip, and stared out the window, as if the world outside mattered more than the voices behind her. From behind the counter, a young waitress named Erin had been watching. She was 24, sharp, and usually didn't get involved. But this time, she moved. Fast. She walked over to their table, her face calm but her voice tight. "You boys think you're funny?" she said. One of them shrugged. "Just making conversation." Erin crossed her arms. "That woman's been coming here longer than I've been alive. You don't know anything about her. Maybe you should keep your mouth shut." The boys looked at one another, unsure if she was serious. "Relax," one said. "It's just a joke." Erin didn't blink. Some people have earned the right to be left alone. She's one of them. There was a silence then. Thick, heavy, the kind of pause that doesn't need to be explained. The boys didn't argue. They just picked up their menus, suddenly much quieter. And in the corner, the old woman kept staring out the window. 10 minutes passed. The diner had settled again into its usual morning rhythm. Eggs sizzling in the back, silverware clinking, the occasional hum of conversation. But the mood was different now. Erin stayed behind the counter, stealing glances at the boys who had gone quiet. The old woman remained still, sipping her coffee, as if the earlier laughter had evaporated into thin air. Then the door opened, and a gust of cold air swept through the diner. He walked in like he belonged there, tall, broad-shouldered despite his age, with a face marked by years in the sun and eyes that missed nothing. He wore a leather jacket with an Air Force patch on the sleeve and carried something under his arm wrapped in brown paper. A few heads turned. Some of the older patrons nodded at him with familiarity that suggested shared memories. Erin's face lit up slightly, and she stepped out from behind the counter. "Morning, Captain," she said. The man smiled. "Is she here?" Erin nodded toward the back. "Corner seat, same as always." He turned and walked toward the wall behind the counter, near the coffee station, with careful hands. He unwrapped the paper to reveal a framed photograph and a metal plate at the bottom. Everyone in the diner began to notice. Conversation stopped again, but this time it was different. The boys looked up, puzzled. The man took out a small nail from his pocket and hammered it in with the back of a spoon. Then he hung the frame on the wall, straight, deliberate, proud. The photo showed a young woman in full Air Force dress uniform, medals lined up across her chest like polished truth. The face was unmistakable. Same quiet eyes, same strong jaw. Except in the photo, she looked like she could fly through hell and not flinch. Below it, the plaque read, Colonel Margaret Evans, combat pilot, U.S. Air Force, 3 tours overseas, Medal of Honor recipient, service above self. No one said a word. The man turned and finally spoke, Not to the boys, not to Aaron, but to the whole room. "Figure it was time we honored her properly," he said. "She didn't ask for this. She never would, but some folks need reminding." His eyes landed briefly on the boys at the table. One of them looked down at his plate, like it had turned into something he wasn't proud to be near. Another's mouth hung open, stunned. Aaron moved closer to the frame, whispering more to herself than anyone. "She flew combat?" The man nodded. 3 tours. Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Saved lives. Buried friends. Took shrapnel to the shoulder and still finished the mission. That medal up there? She earned it in blood. In the corner, the old woman finally stood up, not quickly, not dramatically, just with the slow grace of someone who had carried more weight in her life than any of them could imagine. She walked forward, cane tapping lightly on the tile floor, until she stood face to face with the photograph. For a moment, she just stared at it. Then she turned to the room, her voice quiet but unwavering. "I never wanted recognition," she said. "Never needed anyone to clap for me. I did what I had to, like a lot of others. Most of them aren't here to speak for themselves anymore." Her eyes moved to the young men at the table. "But I will say this. If you're lucky enough to grow old in peace, you owe it to those who didn't act like you've learned something." They couldn't meet her gaze. One muttered an apology. The others just nodded, awkward, ashamed. She nodded back, almost kindly. "Apologies not for me. It's for yourselves." Then she turned, walked back to her seat, and sat down. Same quiet posture, same sip of coffee. But now, she wasn't invisible. Now no one could look away. The silence in the diner wasn't heavy. It was humbling, the kind of quiet that settles after a lesson no one asked for, but everyone needed. Colonel Margaret Evans, though most of them had only ever known her as the quiet old lady in the corner, stood before her own photograph on the wall. Her shoulders were a little hunched from time, her hair whiter than snow, but in that moment, there was nothing fragile about her. She studied the image, eyes tracing the sharp lines of her former uniform, the bars, the ribbons, the medal, a life of service compressed into a single frame. Then she turned, looked at the room full of strangers who suddenly saw her differently, and spoke in a voice both gentle and firm. "I never needed to be remembered," she said. "Not really. Most of the people who deserve to be remembered never are. They're buried in sand half a world away, with dog tags and silence." She looked directly at the young men, the same ones who had mocked her barely 20 minutes ago. Their faces had changed. They weren't sneering anymore. They looked like boys who had just seen a lightning strike up close. "But I do hope," she continued, "that the next time you see someone who looks small or quiet or out of place, you remember this moment. You don't know what someone's carried. You don't know where they've been. You don't know what they've done when no one was watching." She paused. The cane in her hand clicked once on the floor. "So start with respect. It costs you nothing." The boys nodded, not just because they felt they should, but because something in them had shifted. One of them, the loudest of the group, actually stood up. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, voice low and sincere. Margaret didn't smile. She just gave a small nod, enough to acknowledge the effort. Then she turned back to her seat, sat down, and returned to her coffee. The moment passed, but its echo stayed. People in the diner began speaking again, but in hushed tones. Some stared at the wall a little longer. Some wiped at their eyes. Aaron brought the old woman a fresh cup of coffee, without saying a word. Just a hand on her shoulder in silent respect. The man who had hung the picture, her old comrade, gave her one last nod and left the way he came. Quiet, strong, unnoticed by some, unforgettable to others. From that day forward, no one at Miller's Diner called her the quiet old lady again. Her name was Colonel Evans, and her seat by the window was never taken. If this story moved you, even just a little, hit that like button. If you've ever misjudged someone or been misjudged yourself, tell us your story in the comments. We read every one. And if you believe more people need reminders like this, of honor, of humility, of second chances, then subscribe to our channel for more true, powerful stories just like this, because the world needs fewer snap judgments and more quiet heroes.